Well, good evening. Thank you all so much for inviting me to be here. It really is truly an honor to be here and a pleasure to be here. This was a little bit of a journey going through this topic and trying to research and do some and find some information. Here's some stories about our family as we go through this and some other people's families as well. So please take what I say to heart and try to consider some things. Not everything I say is going to be for everybody, but please do try to consider what I say here. All right. Matthew 18:6 says, "But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it is better for him that a heavy millstone be hung around his neck and that he be drowned in the depths of the sea." If you don't know what a millstone is, it was a device used to grind grain. An animal would be attached to a piece of wood and then just basically walk around in a circle and grinding the grain as it went around. Now, I don't know about you, but this passage sounds absurd, does it not? Hanging a millstone around your neck and be drowned in the sea. Here's another absurd idea. Would any of you let your 9-year-old child drive your car by themselves?
No.
More on that later. So why do we need to know what is on our kids' screens? We quite often hear of issues that happen all across the country, and maybe we think, it doesn't happen here, or our kids aren't affected by this. So I went and talked with Sergeant Alcorn with the Richardson Police Department. He works very closely with the SROs that are in our kids' schools, and basically all the schools that the Richardson Police Department has jurisdiction over, so literally right here where our church is. I asked him what is the biggest problem he sees with the kids and electronic devices today. He didn't hesitate or pause or anything, just immediately, right out of his mouth. He immediately said, sending nude or sexual pictures, or in video and sexual acts, a video, between boyfriends and girlfriends. He said the main apps they're using are Instagram and Snapchat. The kids use Snapchat because they think, well, the things will be automatically deleted after 24 hours. And that's true for that app. However, what they said they find is that the kids that receive these usually will take with their phone either a screenshot of it or even a screen video if it's a video that's being sent through Snapchat. And this is very easy to do. I mean, most people are probably used to taking screenshots all the time, but even the video is pretty easy to do. Anybody can Google how to do that on their phones. Then the person that receives that usually either will try to blackmail the other kid about what's going on, or they just turn around and repost it to all their friends, and so it just starts going viral at that point. Show of hands. How many of you think about 5% of our kids are involved in this? 10%? 25%? 40? 50? More? He said there are about 50% of the kids are involved with this. That just floored me. I mean, I was really taken aback by that. Unfortunately, though, I wasn't finished being shocked by this. I always thought child pornography was child pornography. It didn't matter. He said they're so rampant now, they've had to make a distinction between just the still images versus the videos with sexual acts and things like that. He said they don't do much in the way of prosecution until there's either a large quantity of the still pictures or there's videos involved. How sad it was to realize this, that the lesser offenses basically weren't even being punished or sought after. Before you think, no problem, my child would never be involved in this, there's no way they're part of this. It went further. If they just receive the image or the video, they can also be charged. And the reason for that is because he said the first thing they have to do is that if they receive one of these, they have to immediately delete the image or the video and then immediately go tell somebody about it. Now I realize I used immediately twice there, but he really wanted to talk about just how important it was for the timing of that, because literally just your child receiving the image they can still be charged with as well. So make sure your kids know this. Don't let them get involved in this. So I asked him about human trafficking. Yes, there are issues in that area as well. There were at least 2 cases last year that they know of, and they suspect there was a few more. But he told me about one. So you're thinking of the normal, hey, a girl meets a guy online and they have a hookup or something, right? Nope. This person basically met a person online, but this person promised them the world, to be famous, to have all kinds of money, and to live this really great life. Sound familiar? Check out Jesus' temptations in Matthew chapter 4, and you'll see Jesus underwent some of these exact same temptations that this girl did. They arranged for her to have an Uber from her house here to DFW. There was a plane ticket waiting for her at DFW when she got there. Flew her to Nashville, Tennessee. When she got there was another Uber waiting for her to take her to the spot where they abducted her. We live in a really bad time right now. At this point, I was just shaking, and Celia tell you, I just came home after talking with him and just kind of sat down there and just kind of stopped for a minute. So as I continued on, I said, don't forget about TikTok. I know you hear lots about this in the news. But this is run by China. You may say, who cares if China gets my kids' information? China is really, really good about steering their viewers to what they want them to see. Do you want China teaching your kids? Do you really want China having all your kids' personal data? China is a really big deal. At work, I have access to many of the intelligence community websites. And I quite often read those articles that are out there. And I'm not exaggerating when I say this. Literally every single article about all the countries all around the world have a China slant. China is everywhere. There is always something going on with China, and you'd be surprised the number of countries, including our own, that are afraid of them. Okay, so what can we do about this? How can we know what our kids are doing on their phones or on their electronic devices? The world would say, just monitor your kids. Okay. For the first 15 years of my career, I worked on the U-2 spy plane. I traveled all around the world with it, South Korea, Cyprus. I even lived for 13 months in the UAE, or United Arab Emirates. Our motto was, in God we trust, all others we monitor. Okay, so how do we monitor our kids? Sergeant Elkhorn had a few more ideas that he wanted to make sure I passed along to you guys. One, use a monitoring app. Make sure you get one that has a keyword search. Make sure you get one that's both installed on your phone and your kid's phone. Don't worry about writing some of this stuff down. I've got handouts later and I'll pass this out to you. So unless you want to, you're welcome to as well. Don't worry about that. Also, on your kids' phones or your devices, look for hidden folders on their phones. Quite often, they said they find lots in their schools where kids will have a folder titled "For My Eyes Only." And of course, it's password protected by a different password than their phone uses. Click and open every single app regularly, not just once, but regularly on your kids' phones. It's very easy to change the app icons as well as the name on that. You think, oh, who would do that? Well, if you're up to no good, you're trying to hide something, do that all the time. So one of the common examples they see is people who use a calculator app icon, and they'll hide that for something much more nefarious. Show you an example how easy it is to do. My daughter Emma, her senior year in high school, she thought it would be funny one day, and she literally took all the icons on her phone and color-coded them and had everything be whatever the different type of app was. So when you looked at her phone, it was literally just a bunch of colors. And you couldn't, if you notice, there's no text underneath of them as well. So now she just thought it was funny, and her kids and their friends, drove them nuts. Now, obviously, her phone wasn't very easy to use, and so she quickly turned that away. So some other thoughts I have for you are, you have to be very deliberate, as I mentioned already. You can't just do monitoring every once in a while. You have to do it all the time, every day. You are the parent. The phones, electronic devices, belong to you and not your kids. Know your kids' passwords. Now set the example here, though. Make sure you and your spouse know each other's passwords, and make sure your kids know that. Set that example for them to know about that openness and that transparency. I've used Apple's screen time with our kids. We have Apple devices at home. Not that I'm a big fan of them one way or the other, it's just what we have. And it actually works pretty well. I mean, it served us pretty well for what we needed. Android has their version of screen time as well. A lot of different type of apps out there for this. You can set time limits on it for people to use. You can set time of day use. You can set websites that are allowed. You can even prevent them from downloading applications that you don't want them to have. Lots of other options as well. Life 360 is another great app, especially once your kids start driving. But even before that, if they're out with other people, that sort of thing. This app will show you the location of your child. It works internationally as well. Last year, our son Chad spent the spring semester studying abroad in Italy. Everywhere he went through Europe and Israel, we were able to follow him. I don't have the picture of it up here because I couldn't find it anymore, but we looked one day and he was literally in the middle of the Dead Sea. And we texted him later and found out, were you literally in the middle? He said, yeah, our tour group was on a boat in the middle of the Dead Sea. So that was kind of a neat thing to see. It also has crash detection. I'm not sure if y'all know Charles McLeod. He was a longtime Waterview member here. And he recently passed away, and his memorial service was just here, this past Saturday. Charles's daughter and son-in-law, Marcy and Alan, were also members here for a long time. Their youngest son, Trey, is the same age as our son, Chad. And while he was a student at ACU last year, he was involved in a very bad car accident. Alan, his father, was immediately notified via Life 360 about the crash. And their oldest son, Connor, also lived in Abilene. So Alan very quickly texted Connor, and Connor was able to go over and see him. So, example of technology for good here. So, you really can use the technology in the right ways. Did you know that your browser on your phone has a private mode? Have you ever seen that before? So if you notice at the very bottom of the screen, this is my Apple, just on Safari. You can click on that. Most people don't normally do that. You open it up, you can click and see, oh, it's set it to private, and then that's what it says. Now the kids use this because they think, oh, well, no problem, nothing's being stored on my phone, and that's probably true. However, they're still being tracked and everything else that they do online. Again, you are the parent. Don't let your kids have screens in their bedrooms. Keep the screens in public areas. Every day, you have to be deliberate and check your kids' screens. One night while looking at my son Chad's phone, I saw that he had sent an inappropriate text to a friend. It really bothered me. Unfortunately, he had learned the information from someone in a position of authority, so he thought it was okay and he thought it was kind of funny. He didn't really understand what it was he was sending. I talked with him, explained just how bad it was and what it was that he sent, and how much he needed to apologize and to make things right. And as a result, he was able to maintain the friendship with this person and do no further damage with his fellow Christian. Now the good that came out of that is a couple years later, Chad was in a similar position of authority, and he was able to take his position much, much more serious. And he even talked to us about things he was planning on doing when he was in that role, and because he had seen the other person and how bad things went. So he was telling us about all these different things he's going to do and so forth. And so really pleased to see that the way he transpired with him. When your friends come over, when your kids' friends come over and to play with your kids, make sure they leave their screens in the public place as well. They shouldn't need them to play, but if something does come up and you agree with it, it's okay. Give close supervision when they're doing it. The standards should be kept high, the same for every person that comes in your house, not just the kids. I recently heard from a child here, this was actually part of Bible Bowl not too long ago, in our youth group, that doesn't have a phone. And they told me they didn't like it when their friends would take out their phones when they're playing, because they said as soon as the person took out their phone, they were immediately ignored. How sad is that? You can't even be there face to face. Know your kids, friends, parents. Make sure you get that right. Know what is and isn't allowed in their household. Again, you are the parents, and you can say no and should from time to time. Keep the standards high, don't compromise. Get your own router. Don't just use the router that comes with your internet service provider. There are many different options out there. Some allow you to set limits and rules by device. When using your own router, one of the things it allows you to do is sometimes the service providers resets things and it wipes all your settings out. So this would prevent that from happening. The other advantage is if you're someone that moves or expecting to move, you take your router with you as you go from place to place, and your kids have the same internet experience as they go. Go through your kids' phone and turn off cellular data for most of their apps. Don't do this obviously for apps that they're going to need when they're away from home, that sort of thing, not on Wi-Fi. Now this one's going to sound weird at first when I tell you this. When they are at home and they want to use an app that has advertisements on it, also tell them to turn off their Wi-Fi while they're using that app. Now you're going to think, why would I do that? They don't have cellular data or Wi-Fi. Most apps, when they're playing their games or whatever, are going to function just fine without the Wi-Fi. What the good advantage of that is you won't get any of those advertisements to pop up. You have both cellular data and Wi-Fi on. So it's a great way to, again, prevent China from coming in and putting in more advertisements for our kids. Put your kids' emails on your phones. I don't know if you realize this or not, but you can have many, many addresses on your phone. So, I still have my kids' addresses on our phone today. As I've said before, you have to be very, very deliberate. The kids are smart and so are their friends. They'll always find ways around any obstacles you put up. Unless you're the NSA, you can't monitor everything. Now obviously this isn't mean, this isn't their seal. We had this up in our skiff at work, but it's funny, but sadly true. I don't know if you can read it around. It says, the only part of the government that actually listens. So if you really want to be sure what's on your kid's screen, I'd say follow what the Bible says to do. You need to fill your kids' hearts with the love of God. Matthew 12:34-35 says, you offspring of vipers, how can you, being evil, express any good things? For the mouth speaks from that which fills the heart. The good person brings out of his good treasure good things, and the evil person brings out of his evil treasure evil things. So how do you fill your kids' hearts with the love of God? To start with, is your heart filled with the love of God? Is your spouse's heart filled with the love of God? Are you convicted that Jesus is God's Son? Are you convicted that God created the world in 7 days? Are you convicted that Jesus died on the cross for your sins and was raised again on the third day? Okay, now you may be thinking, I'm crazy. Why do you need to be convicted about God creating the world in 7 days? If you stop and think about that, believing God created the world in 7 days, especially given there's lots of evidence out there for it, that's an easier thing to believe than someone literally being raised from the dead. Do your kids know you're convicted? Talk to your kids every day about God. Deuteronomy 6, chapter 6, verses 4 through 7. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give to you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Put God's words into your words all the time. Come up with examples of things you can say. You'd be surprised all the different ways you can incorporate God into your daily speech. Isn't this a wonderful day God created for us? Isn't God's creation beautiful? I promise you, if you continue to do this, that'll help your faith. It'll also help your kids as well. Do your kids see you sharing your faith with others? Our kids did speech and debate in high school, and so since we were a homeschool team, we also had to judge. Well, at one of the tournaments in Aubrey, which is just a few miles northwest of here, I had an opportunity to share my faith with one of the kids from one of the other schools. Now, it was in an event that I was judging. This child was very confused about their sexual ID. And her speech was all about that. That's all she wanted to talk about. Now, I did give her the win because of all the kids who were there, by far, she was the best speaker of all of them. But I was really taken aback by what she had said about herself and how just uncertain she was. So after I finished filling out the ballot, making sure she knew about what she did well and what she could work on, I drew a line across the bottom of the ballot, and then I just simply wrote on it, you should be proud of the way God made you, and that God loves you just the way you are. Now, I had only intended for her to see this, but God had much bigger plans. As the coach for the child found out what I was written, she was really, really upset. And she really wanted to give me a piece of her mind. I found out later that she really pushed gay and lesbian concepts on all the kids on her speech and debate team. That really made me sad when I found that out. But while she was trying to run me down about what I'd written and so forth, she just happened to mention to me that what made her so upset was every single one of the kids on her team had gotten to read what I wrote. At that point, a smile came on my face because I'd only intended for the one child to hear it, but God had much bigger plans. That really made her mad, and so she just stormed off. So when my kids found out about it, that just gave them even more confidence to talk to their friends about Jesus, which they do all the time. And we see this, we hear them, and especially when we're meeting with college and so forth, it's neat to hear their friends and what they talk about. Do your best to always explain why to your kids. This will teach them to think and evaluate the situation. There may be times when you can't explain why because you're going through something. But if you've done this enough, they know your habit of explaining why. Just tell them at that time, I can't explain why right now, but please just do this and I'll explain why later. You'll be surprised. They really will do it, and it really does work. I've done that many times with our kids. Do your best to shield your kids from the world while they are young. Do your kids really need a phone before they start driving? Now, I know there's always exceptions to every rule, and I'm not trying to say that's a rule or anything like that, but seriously contemplate that. Do your kids really need the phone? Again, would you let your 9-year-old drive your car? While your kids are young, you should be explaining to them the features of driving a car. So when they are old enough and mature enough, they will be well equipped. You should be doing the exact same thing with screens. So having them sit by you, watching you as you're going on social media and doing things, so they can see how to do it properly. That way, when they are on their own, they will be set up for success. Phones and cars have a lot in common. Both can be used for many good activities. However, it is very easy to get in trouble quickly with your car or your phone, and even whether it's your fault or not. A lot of similarities there. We are called to sanctified living, or being set apart from the world. God calls us to be different from the world. We should be strange in the eyes of the world. 1 Peter 13 through 16 says, "Therefore, prepare your minds for action. Keep sober in spirit. Set your hope completely on the grace to be brought to you at the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, do not be conformed to the former lusts which were yours in your ignorance. But like the Holy One who called you, be holy yourselves also in all your behavior. Because it is written, you shall be holy, for I am holy." Now, we don't have time now, but I would encourage each of you to go back and read all of 1 Peter. It's full of all of what happens with sanctified living, the consequences of doing the sanctified living and all the good things, as well as not doing the sanctified living and what happens that way as well. I would definitely encourage you to go do that. So why would you give your kids phones when they are young? Matthew 18, 1 through 9 says, At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and said, "Who then is greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" And he called a child to himself and set him among them, and said, "Truly I say to you, unless you change to become like children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. So, whoever will humble himself like this child, he is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever receives one such child in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it is better for him that a heavy millstone be hung around his neck, and that he be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of its stumbling blocks. For it is inevitable that stumbling blocks come, but woe to that person through whom the stumbling blocks come. And if your hand or your foot is causing you to sin, cut it off and throw it away from you. It is better for you to enter life maimed or without a foot than to have 2 hands or 2 feet and be thrown into the eternal fire. If your eye is causing you to sin, tear it out and throw it away from you. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than to have 2 eyes and be thrown into fiery hell. Have you ever considered what it means if your hand or your foot or your eye causes you to sin? Cut it off, gouge it out, throw it away. Sounds weird, again, similar to before, and it sounds almost absurd. This is the pilot of the U-2 spy plane. He has to wear a full pressure suit because above 60,000 feet, all the liquid in his body would immediately boil off, and he'd be dead in about 5 seconds. They have videos when they're in the altitude chamber, they put a pot of water in there, and as soon as they cross the 60,000 foot level, every bit of the water just explodes right away. It's really a terrifying sight to understand that they really have to have that pressure suit. Our country is willing to go and take radical and drastic measures to monitor our enemies. Sometimes you also have to take radical and drastic action to stop or prevent sin, either from yourself or your kids. Have you ever considered homeschooling or any other alternative schools from public school? We started to homeschool our kids when Chad was in 5th grade. And then the next year we brought Emma home as well. And we never looked back. And our kids loved it every minute of it. What are your kids learning in public schools for 8 hours a day? Well, God didn't create the earth. Science is key, and God is just a story. Think about that. How many people say science is absolute truth, and everything else has to fall before that? That's what they're teaching our kids in school. Their friends will educate them about sex and gender identity. Well, you may be feeling overwhelmed now, so I realize there was a lot of information here. So I have some handouts for you, and you can certainly be welcome to take those. On this handout is Sergeant Alcorn's phone number. He wanted to make sure I passed that out to you as well, because he said your SRO in your school, if you are continuing keeping your kids in public school, can be a great resource for you. They have SROs, at least one SRO in every single high school, as well as junior high, and they have at least one SRO that does rotate through the elementary schools. And by the way, all of the sexual concept I was talking about, he said that usually starts in junior high, and that moves its way into high school. It's across all ages, all economic, socioeconomic environments, all genders, all races, all everything. It doesn't matter, it's widespread. But you're not alone. I want to make sure we leave that with you. Most people remember the account in 1 Kings 18 of Elijah facing off the 450 prophets of Baal. Remember there's that great show of faith on Mount Carmel, and how Elijah really showed who the one true God was. But most people forget about what happened in the very next chapter, in chapter 19. Queen Jezebel was humiliated, and she was just on fire, and she wanted to kill Elijah. Elijah got scared and he ran and hid in a cave. And a couple of times along the journey, God asked him, "Elijah, what's wrong? What are you doing?" And he responded every time, "God, I did what you wanted me to do, but I was the only one left. I'm alone. I'm all by myself." Well, after this happened a couple times, God gave Elijah direction on where to go next. Then in verse 18 of chapter 19, God says, Yet I have reserved 7,000 of Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. God created his church for us so we can support each other, encourage each other. We've been there. A long time ago, when our kids were very young, we discovered Satan entered our household. Jim and Merle Alexander, as well as all the elder elders and their wives, ministers and their family, they helped us through that time. That's the only way we got through that dark time. My phone number is also on that sheet. When I needed a host, someone picked up the phone for me. I will pick up the phone for you. Call me if you need it, anytime. I promise you. I do have a top secret clearance with SCI access. I can keep a secret. It's not a problem. I promise. Whatever you say, I will keep it in confidence. I will be there to help you anything I can. Anything with homeschooling or anything else. I love math. I was the nerd in school. Most people were playing baseball or football or basketball. I got on a bus from Georgia and rode a school bus on weekends to Alabama to do math tournaments. I know I'm weird. You probably already do that by now. I've helped a lot of kids with math over the years. Happy to help your kids in any way that possibly can. Anything they need, call. I'll be happy to help.